The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I know it was Tuesday because I had just come back from the 7-hour drive from Indianapolis to Chicago, still in the clothes I had worn to receive the Regional Architecture Excellence Award, the navy blazer with the small gold pin on the lapel that the Institute gives every recipient, the kind of pin you keep in a dish on your dresser for years because you're not sure what else to do with something that meant that much and cost you that much to earn. I had also driven myself home. The letter was from my mother. Real paper, her handwriting, the looping cursive she uses when she wants something to feel considered. I set it on the kitchen counter and made coffee first. That felt important somehow to be warm before I read it. I'll come back to the letter. Let me ask you something before I go further. Have you ever prepared for a moment for so long that the preparation itself became a kind of company? You stop needing the actual moment to arrive because the rehearsal of it has already filled the space where the celebration was supposed to go. I had been doing that for years before that Tuesday. I just didn't have a word for it until I was standing alone in a hotel ballroom in Indianapolis, holding a glass of sparkling water with my name on a plaque in front of me, watching other recipients get photographed with their families. I grew up in a house in Columbus, Ohio, where love was distributed the way some people distribute inheritance in advance, unevenly, and with the unstated assumption that the recipient should be grateful for whatever portion arrived. My younger brother Danny was not a bad person. I want to be precise about that because the easier version of this story makes him a villain, and he was not one. He was just louder. More immediately legible to my parents. The kind of person whose needs presented themselves as emergencies, which meant they always got treated as emergencies, which meant they were always addressed first. My mother called it being supportive. What it looked like from where I stood was this. When I was 16 and placed second in the state mathematics competition, my father took a call from Danny's baseball coach during the dinner my mother had half organized to mark the occasion. He stepped outside. He stayed outside for 40 minutes. The dinner continued without him, which is to say it continued without the version of it that was supposed to matter. When I was accepted to the architecture program at Ohio State Full Merit Scholarship, one of 12 students admitted that year, my mother's first response was, "Are you sure that's practical? Danny's thinking about community college and I just don't want you to make him feel bad." I was 18. I had just been told I would not have to pay for my education. I spent 20 minutes reassuring my mother that my scholarship would not emotionally damage my brother. I stopped expecting things after a while, not out of resignation exactly, more the way you stop checking a particular door after enough times of it being locked. You don't stop believing in the room on the other side. You just redirect your energy toward doors that actually open. The architecture program took everything I had and gave back more. I found out I was good at the specific kind of problem that buildings present, the negotiation between what a space needs to do and what it needs to feel like. I did a thesis on adaptive reuse of industrial structures in post-manufacturing Midwest cities, which sounds dry until you stand inside a converted grain elevator and feel how the light moves through it in a way that no one planned but everyone experiences. I graduated with honors. My parents attended the ceremony. My mother took photographs. My father shook my hand and said, "Well, you did it." My brother, who had driven up from Columbus to see a friend that same weekend, did not stop by. That was 7 years before Indianapolis. In those 7 years I built a career the way you build anything worth having, slowly, with repeated failure that you have to choose not to internalize. I joined a mid-size firm in Chicago that specialized in community and civic architecture, public libraries, affordable housing developments, a health clinic in a neighborhood that had not had one in 20 years. The work was not glamorous. The pay was not spectacular. But there is a specific satisfaction in designing a space that people who have been told their entire lives they don't deserve nice things will use every day. I held on to that. The Regional Architecture Excellence Award is given annually by the Midwest Institute of Design to one architect under 40. It is not a household name. It is not a national prize, but in my field, in my region, among the people whose respect I had spent a decade trying to earn, it was significant. The kind of significant that your graduate advisor emails you about with exclamation points. The kind where colleagues you haven't spoken to in 2 years find you on LinkedIn. I found out I'd won on a Wednesday afternoon in February. I was at my desk eating lunch, and my phone rang with an Indianapolis area code, and I almost didn't answer because I thought it was a robocall. The ceremony was 6 weeks away. On a Saturday, in April, I called my parents that same Wednesday evening. My mother answered. I told her. There was a pause, the particular pause I had learned to translate over 32 years, the one where she was calculating something before responding. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful," she said. "When is it?" I told her the date. I told her the city. I told her it was a ticketed event and that I had 2 guest seats I wanted to give to her and my father. "Let me check with your father," she said. She called back Thursday morning. They would try to make it. She said try. I noted the word and built no expectations around it, which is to say I built exactly the amount of expectations that word warranted and then tried to add a buffer on top of that. I told myself, if they come, it will be wonderful. If they don't, the award still happened. I told myself that for 6 weeks. On the Friday before the ceremony, my brother called. Danny calls about twice a year, usually when something is happening in his life that he wants an audience for. He had recently started a landscaping business, his 3rd business in 4 years, following a food truck that lasted 8 months and a pressure washing operation that ended after a dispute with a supplier I never fully understood. The landscaping business seemed to be going better. He had a crew of 4. He had a few regular clients. "Hey," he said, "I wanted to give you a heads up. Mom and Dad aren't going to make it tomorrow." I was at my desk. I was looking at the revised floor plan for a library branch project, a detail I remember specifically because I kept my eyes on it while he talked, the way you focus on something stationary when the room starts moving. "Okay," I said. "It's kind of bad timing," he said. "I landed a big contract, actually big, a condo complex on the east side. They want full seasonal maintenance, and they want to do a walkthrough tomorrow morning with the property manager. Mom and Dad are coming to help me look professional. Dad's good with that handshake stuff. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment because it matters. It was not surprise. That is the thing about a lifelong pattern, it doesn't surprise you anymore. What I felt was more like a confirmation. The final data point in a study I had been running for 32 years, the one that lets you close the file because you finally have enough evidence to write the conclusion. "A landscaping walkthrough," I said. "It's a big deal for the business," he said. "You get it, right? You know how they are." I did know how they were. "Sure," I said. "I get it. You're not mad?" "I have to finish something," I said. "I hope the walkthrough goes well." I hung up and sat for a long time looking at the library floor plan. Then I took the 2 guest ticket envelopes from my desk drawer. I had addressed them in November, the day the tickets arrived, because I had wanted to feel the physical act of planning for them to be there, and I put them in the recycling bin under my desk. The drive to Indianapolis the next morning took 3 hours and 40 minutes. I had a playlist I'd made specifically for the drive, which in retrospect was either optimistic or a form of self-care I am still not entirely sure I deserved. I checked into the hotel, pressed my blazer, pinned on the Institute pin, and went downstairs to the pre-ceremony reception. There was a woman there older than me, maybe 60, one of the senior fellows being recognized for lifetime achievement, who noticed me standing alone at the side of the room with my name badge and my award category printed on it. She came over with the specific directness of someone who has attended enough of these events to know that standing alone in a ballroom full of clustered families is a particular flavor of exposure. "First time being recognized here?" she asked. "First time being nominated for anything, actually," I said. She looked at my badge. "Regional excellence, that's the one that matters for your career." She said it simply, as a fact, the way someone who has been in an industry long enough to have watched careers develop says things. "Your people here? They couldn't make it," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "Mine didn't come to my first one either," she said. "I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could go in." She held up her sparkling water. "It still counts. It counts regardless." When they called my name, Elena Marsh, Regional Architecture Excellence Award, she was 3 tables away and she started clapping before the applause spread. I walked to the podium and I shook the institute director's hand, and I held the award, and I thought about the grain elevator and the library and the health clinic and the people who walked into those spaces every day and didn't know my name, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was just accompanied by a specific ache that I had no interest in pretending wasn't there. I drove home on Sunday. On Tuesday I found my mother's letter. I made the coffee first. Then I opened it. She wrote about Danny's contract. She wrote that it was really a significant step for the business, and that my father had felt it was important to show up for him. She wrote that she hoped I understood. She wrote, near the bottom of the page in slightly smaller handwriting, "I watched the ceremony on the live stream link the Institute posted. You looked so poised up there. Your grandfather would have been proud." I read that sentence 4 times. I noticed what it was. She had watched. She had seen it. She had chosen to watch it from a couch in Columbus rather than from a seat in Indianapolis, and now she was telling me she had watched it as though that were a version of being there. As though the livestream link were a substitution that required no acknowledgement of what it had substituted for. I set the letter on the counter and finished my coffee. Then, I did something I had been building toward for a long time without naming it. I opened my laptop and I wrote an email to Dr. Sandra Okafor at the National Civic Design Foundation in Seattle. She had been recruiting me for 14 months, a senior design lead position on a federally funded initiative examining how public architecture in underserved communities affects long-term health outcomes. Specifically, how the design of clinics, libraries, and community centers in low-income areas either reinforces or disrupts cycles of environmental stress. It was the exact project my 7 years of work had been aimed at without my having known there was a target. I had been hesitating. Seattle meant leaving Chicago. It meant leaving the ambient possibility, the one I had been carrying for years like a small stone in my pocket, that my family and I might someday arrive at something honest. I told Dr. Okafor I was ready to discuss terms. While I was at it, I did one other thing I had been drafting in the back of my mind for 18 months. I filed the paperwork to legally change my last name. Not Marsh, my father's name, the one I had carried for 32 years with the unexamined loyalty of someone who has never been asked whether the name fits. I changed it to Calloway. My maternal grandmother's name, the one she carried before she married, the one she signed on the birthday cards she sent me every year, without fail, from her house in Vermont until she died when I was 23. She had been the person in my family who showed up. She drove 6 hours to see my thesis presentation. She kept a folder of every article I was ever mentioned in. When she died, she left me her drafting table, a beautiful old oak thing that had been her husband's, who had been a carpenter, and a note that said, "You build things that last. So do that." Elena Calloway felt like an accurate name. Elena Marsh had started to feel like a character I had been playing in someone else's story. I told my parents in a letter. Paper, like my mother had used, because I wanted the deliberateness of it. I explained the name change. I explained Seattle. I explained that I needed distance to understand what an honest relationship with them might actually look like, if one were possible. I told them I was not doing this in anger. I told them I was doing it because continuing to arrange my life around a door that had been locked for 32 years was no longer something I was willing to call loyalty. My father responded in 5 days. His email was 4 sentences. He said I was overreacting. He said Danny needed support right now, and this was not the time. He said the drive to Indianapolis was long and my mother's knees had been bad. He said he hoped I would reconsider Seattle. My mother called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. In the second one, she said that she had told her sister about the name change and her sister had said it sounded like a crisis. She said she was worried about me. She did not say she was sorry about Indianapolis. She did not say she was sorry about any of the 32 years that Indianapolis had been the conclusion of. I packed my drafting table last because it was the hardest thing to wrap safely. I drove northwest in October, which is arguably the worst month to drive through the plains, but also the most honest flat gray sky, empty fields, the landscape not pretending to be anything other than what it is. Seattle suited me in the way that the right place does when you've been in the wrong one long enough to have forgotten what fit felt like. The foundation was in a converted warehouse near the water. Dr. Okafor handed me a project brief on my first day and said, "We have 17 communities in 8 states. We think good design can change health outcomes by a measurable margin. We just don't have the proof yet. That's what we're building." I had been in Seattle for 4 months when I received a call from a colleague at my former firm in Chicago. Her name was Patricia, and she was careful and precise in the way that people are when they are delivering information they know is complicated. The city of Columbus had commissioned an environmental review of a landscaping and grounds maintenance company that had been awarded a contract for a new mixed-use development on the east side. The review had been triggered by a complaint from a subcontractor regarding improper disposal of chemical runoff from lawn treatment products. My brother's company, Marsh Grounds, LLC, was the primary contractor. Patricia had called me because she had seen my former last name in the filing documents before the change had fully propagated through the professional directories. She wanted to make sure I knew before it became public record. I sat with that for a long time. The specific shape of it, the way certain things arrange themselves in patterns you would not have chosen but cannot call coincidental. I called a colleague in environmental compliance. I asked her to walk me through the complaint and what the review process would involve. I asked her what the exposure looked like for the primary contractor, if the violations were substantiated. she told me. It was not minor. Then I called my brother. He answered on the third ring with the particular tone of someone who has heard something is coming and is deciding whether to be defensive or conciliatory. "Hey," he said. "I guess you heard." "I heard," I said. "I want to talk about it factually. Not as your sister right now. As someone who understands what the review process looks like." He was quiet. I told him what the environmental compliance process involved. I told him that voluntary cooperation with the review at this stage would be meaningfully different from being non-cooperative when the findings were formalized. I told him that if the runoff disposal issue was isolated and correctable, proactive remediation and documentation were his best path. I told him I was not going to intervene in the process or use any professional relationship to protect him from it. But I was telling him what I knew because people getting ahead of these things had better outcomes than people who didn't. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, not suspiciously, almost genuinely confused. "Because the correct information helps people make better choices," I said. "I'm not doing it for you specifically. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do with information I have." There was a pause. "Are you still mad about Indianapolis?" I thought about how to answer that honestly. "I'm not organizing my decisions around Indianapolis," I said. "I don't have the energy to be mad about it anymore. I have other things I'm building." He didn't say much after that. I told him to get an environmental compliance attorney before the week was out, and I meant it as practical advice, not a threat. My parents called that same evening. My mother first. I answered this time because I felt for the first time in a long time that I had something stable to stand on when I picked up the phone. She asked if I had talked to Danny. I told her yes. She asked if I was going to help him. I told her I had given him accurate information and recommended a professional. She said she wished I could do more. She said this was a hard time for the family. She said she knew things had been difficult between us and she hoped we could move forward. I noticed what she was doing. Not consciously, probably. But she was asking me to absorb the difficulty of the situation, Danny's situation, the family's situation, the way I had been absorbing difficulty my entire life. Quietly, without acknowledgement of what the absorption cost. "I think moving forward is a good goal," I said. "I'd like to do that too, but I need it to be a real conversation, not a performance of one. I need us to talk about patterns, not just situations." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I don't always know how to talk about things like that." "I know," I said. "That's something we could work on if you want to." My father got on the line then. He asked how Seattle was. I told him it was good. He asked about the job. I gave him a brief description. He said it sounded important. He said it in the voice he uses for things he doesn't fully understand but senses he is supposed to respect. "It is," I said. "I think it's the work I'm supposed to be doing." He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "Your mother and I could come visit sometime, see the city." It was not an apology. I want to be exact about that because the apology version of this story is tidier and also untrue. It was not an apology. It was more like an extension, a hand offered not an acknowledgement of what had passed but in the direction of what might still be possible. And I understood, finally, the difference between those two things, and why you cannot skip from the first to the second by pretending the distance between them doesn't exist. "That would be okay," I said. "When you're ready to have a real conversation, I'm willing to have one." The environmental review of my brother's company was completed over the following 3 months. The violations were substantiated but categorized as correctable. He paid a fine. He implemented a new runoff management system and hired a compliance consultant. The condo complex contract was suspended during the review period, but reinstated after remediation was documented. He kept his business. It cost him money and 6 months of stress and a version of humility he had not been required to practice before. He texted me in February, the month after the reinstatement. It said, "Compliance attorney was good advice. Company is still standing. Thanks." I looked at that text for a while. I thought about what it would have cost him to send it and what it would have cost him to not send it. I thought about how people in my family communicate sideways, compressed, in the smallest possible unit of acknowledgement that still technically counts. I replied, "Good, I'm glad." Both of those things were true. I have my grandmother's drafting table set up in front of the window that looks out toward the water. In the mornings when the fog is still sitting on the hills, I make coffee and stand at that window and think about the 17 communities in 8 states and the libraries and clinics, and the way light moves through a well-designed space and changes what people feel. It is possible for them to deserve. The award is on the bookshelf. The pin is in a dish on the dresser. I don't need to decide what to do with it. I already know. It is evidence that the work happened, that it mattered, that it was measured by people qualified to measure it and found to be excellent. That is not diminished by who was or wasn't in the room when I received it. The room was full of people who understood what they were witnessing. That turned out to be enough. My mother and I talk on the phone once or twice a month now. The conversations are careful, not performed careful. There is a difference, and learning to tell the difference has been some of the most important work I've done. She asks about projects. I tell her. She tells me about the garden she started in the backyard, which I did not know she had wanted. Occasionally she says something that sounds like the beginning of a real thing, and I stay with it instead of moving past it, and sometimes it opens a little further. Last month she said, I think I didn't know what your work meant to you. I think I didn't understand how to be proud of something I didn't understand. She said it quietly, in the middle of a conversation about something else, the way people say the true things sideways, when they think you might not be fully listening. I was listening. I said, thank you for saying that. And I meant it for what it was, not absolution, not resolution, just one true thing offered and received between two people who are still, slowly, learning the language of each other. The drafting table faces the window. The fog lifts by mid-morning. I go back to work. Here is what I want to leave you with. There is a kind of waiting that looks like loyalty but is actually just fear. Fear that if you stop waiting, you will have to accept the loss of what you were waiting for. I waited for a long time. And I want to be honest about the fact that stopping the wait did not make the loss disappear. It just made me stop organizing my life around trying to prevent it. The work is still the work. The award still happened. The library is still open, and people are still walking through it, and the light still moves the way I calculated it would. None of that required an audience. So I'll leave you with this. If you have been building something real, something that took years, something that cost you and the people who were supposed to witness it chose something smaller instead, what do you do with the thing you built? Do you let their absence determine its value? Or do you carry it forward into the life you're constructing for yourself, the one where the foundation is solid because you laid it, not because someone watched you do it? What do you think you'll do with that?